Composition News. I'm your anchor, Jack Labriola, and here's tonight's top story. A young local boy almost got his grandfather eaten today when he exclaimed, "Let's eat, Grandpa," without the proper use of a comma. Truly tragic stuff, as his entire family was up in arms with their knives and forks hunting their grandfather down. Luckily, the authorities arrived just in time and no one was hurt. Though the young boy is now doing 5 to 10 pages of extra credit homework until he knows how to get his commas right. Justice has been served. That's not all we have for you tonight, folks. Tonight on the show, active and passive voice. When to use what is appropriate, and how do you know the difference between the two? Stay tuned. Welcome back to Composition News. Folks, if you're just joining us tonight, the menu, active and passive voice. So let's dive right in. Now, what exactly is active voice? Well, the active voice is a way of constructing a sentence so that the subject is a person or thing that performs the stated action. If we want to use a simple example, Logan mailed the letter. The subject is Logan, the direct object being affected is the letter, and the verb the subject is performing is to mail, or mailed in this case. So the active voice flows a lot smoother than the passive voice, and it's usually more direct too, which makes it a lot easier than the passive voice, which unnecessarily adds words and may make the reader have to work harder to try and understand what you're trying to convey in your sentences, which, for the audience of someone evaluating your writing, is not something you want to do. But then what exactly is the passive voice? Because it sounds like I don't want to do it. Well, the passive voice is a way of constructing a sentence also, but in a way so that the subject is the person or thing that experiences the effect of an action rather than the person or thing that causes the effect. So in a passive voice, the verb is done to the subject as opposed to the subject doing a verb. So if we want to use that same example of Logan mailed the letter, that's the active, whereas the passive, we gotta switch around some things and add some words. In this case, the letter was mailed by Logan. The subject is now the letter instead of Logan. The verb is still mailed, but now it's preceded by a form of to be, which in this case is was. And the subject from the active Logan is now moved to where the object used to be and turned into a prepositional phrase with the word by, in this case, by Logan. So another example of this in the active could be most of the class is reading the book, whereas the passive is the book was being read by most of the class. Again, we have to add some words and rearrange and tinker with where the subject and the objects are, which may make it harder or more confusing for your reader to try and get through your sentences. So some tips to recognize when you're proofreading or in the midst of writing so that you can try to avoid using the passive voice expressions. You can recognize them because the verb phrase will always include a form of be, whether it's, for example, am, is, was, were, are, or been, to name a few, and the presence of a to be verb may not necessarily mean it's in passive voice, but it's usually a good indicator when going through your own writing. Now, another way to recognize the passive voice is that the sentence may include by the after the verb, so that the agent performing the action, if named, is the object of the preposition in this phrase. So then when is it okay to use the passive voice? Because it has to be okay, right? Otherwise it wouldn't be a thing. Well, it's okay to use the passive voice when you're trying to emphasize an object. For example, 100 votes are required to pass the bill. The passive sentence emphasizes the number of votes that are required. And an active version, which could be the bill requires 100 votes to pass, would be putting emphasis on the bill and not the votes, which may be less dramatic if you're trying to get the emphasis to be those votes that are specifically required for this bill. Now, it's also okay to use the passive voice if your readers don't need to know who's responsible for doing some sort of action. For example, a passive sentence could be, baby Sophia was delivered at 3 a.m. yesterday. Whereas an active instance of this sentence could be, Dr. Susan Jones delivered baby Sophia at 3 a.m. yesterday. Now, the first sentence might be more appropriate in a birth announcement where you send it to the family and friends because they're not likely to even know who Dr. Jones is and are much more interested in the object which in this case is the baby, rather than the actor performing the action, the doctor. Now, a hospital report of yesterday's events might be more likely to focus on Dr. Jones's role and may use the active voice because they are aware of who Dr. Jones is. So that's all we have tonight in active and passive voice, and I hope that you've learned something because I know I sure have. So, from your anchor Jack Labriola here at Composition News, we bid you good night, and we hope to see you again next time.